Well, welcome to Keeping Money Local, a Southern Illinois seminar series. My name is Byron Fager, and I'm from the Southern Illinois Community Foundation. I'll be your moderator tonight. In our last session, we focused on the big picture. Tonight, we dive a little deeper into looking at supporting the local economy. I want to take a moment to recognize our sponsors tonight, the Southern Illinois Community Foundation, Carbondale Spring, Cristados, and the Southern Illinois Collaborative Kitchen, the Climate Economy Education Incorporated, Egyptian Electric Cooperative Association, and the City of Harrisburg. Special thanks to financial support from Carbondale Spring.
Hello, and thank you for being with us this evening. My name is Sonia Kruger, and I represent Carbondale Spring People's Movement. Our mission is to create the solutions to meet the basic needs of every person in town. 2 years ago, we came together to develop a system of mutual support. After a year of research and weekly meetings, 4 programs were organized. These programs include food autonomy, solar renewable energy development, cooperative small business ownership, and care worker response. In 2020 alone, the Food Autonomy Board coordinated 3 summer gardens, 2 fall gardens, and provided the labor, funds, and resources for them. The community gardens provided specialized training, led to the construction of 15 chicken coops, door-to-door produce deliveries, free meal programs, educational outdoor workshops, and the cultivation of a new food forest led to plant and tree giveaway programs. To learn more about the cumulative impact of Carbondale Springs' mission, visit us at our website, carbondalespring.org.
So let's set up a few parameters for this evening. We are pleased to have 3 presentations set up for you tonight. In the interest of time and making sure we make it through the core presentations, we're going to ask that you please enter your questions into the Q&A or into the chat if you can't access the Q&A. And at the end, we'll work through as many as possible. So I want to introduce our first speaker tonight, Michael Shuman. He's an economist, an attorney, an author, an entrepreneur, and a leading visionary on community economics. He is one of the world's leading voices in creating stronger, more resilient places and communities. His books include The Local Economy Solution and Put Your Money Where Your Life Is. His latest workshop in partnership with Australia's leading placemaking consultancy, Village Well, is entitled The New Local: Building Resilient and Regenerative Communities, Cities, Towns, and Main Streets in a Post-COVID and Climate-Changed World. This workshop will be available online soon, and Michael has also posted a free introductory course on cleannetwork.com. So Michael, glad to hear from you tonight.
Thank you very much, Byron. Pleased to be with you all and to talk a little bit about how one can make a successful local economy. Give me a second to share my screen here. And hopefully, and Amy, can you confirm that my first slide is showing on the screen?
Yes, pollinating a local success.
Wonderful, thank you. So this is a talk really in 2 parts. One part is discussing the principles for a successful local economy, which I think most of you know, but maybe it's useful to know all the evidence underlying that principle, those principles, and as a new and somewhat different approach to economic development. And the idea of pollinators is, can you do more in economic development with little or no money? And given what the shutdowns of COVID-19 have done to our economies and our budgets, we really have to think this way for the next stages of economic development. In my view, there are 4 rules for local prosperity. The first is to maximize the percentage of jobs in locally owned business. The second is to maximize the local diversity of your business sectors, which is another way of saying to be as self-reliant as is reasonably possible. The third is to spread models of triple bottom line success. In other words, models that not only have profitable business, but businesses that are good for the environment and good for the workforce. And then finally, to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So let's talk about each of these rules and what's some of the evidence that underlies them. So rule number one, again, emphasizes the importance of local ownership as the central focal point for economic development. This slide here shows a study that was done in British Columbia in 2013, comparing the impact of $1 going into independently owned restaurants and retailers versus $1 going into chain-owned restaurants and retailers. And what you can see is that $1 going into the independent restaurant and retail sector would recirculate another 48 cents. And this is a relatively high number because these restaurants and retailers have local relationships, and that facilitates the local respending of money. That is the local multiplier effect. The chains, on the other hand, are respending only about 18 cents on the dollar. So what this means is that every time a British Columbian resident mindfully spends $1 on restaurants and retailers that are locally owned, the province enjoys roughly 2.5 times the job effects, 2.5 times the income and wealth effects, 2.5 times the tax collections, 2.5 times the charitable contributions. We're not talking about small bits of difference. And there have been about 24 of these studies done over the last, 20 years or so. And they all show that when you compare two similar businesses or two similar industries, one locally owned and one not, the locally owned business or industry will generate 2 to 4 times the economic development impact as the non-local business or industry. And there's not a single study that has shown otherwise. But you don't have to take my word for it. This is from the Harvard Business Review in the summer of 2010. It's a look at communities across the United States, and what it finds is that in those communities with the highest density of locally owned business, there is the highest per capita job growth rate. But not just that, but this study from the Federal Reserve of Atlanta in 2013, which looked at counties across the United States, found that in those counties with the highest density of locally owned business, there is the highest per capita income growth rate. So in other words, if you want to reduce poverty, raise social equity, locally owned businesses are your best ticket for doing so. And we know that locally owned businesses are critical for other forms of economic development as well. When tourists come to town, they're interested in the unique flavor, the unique DNA that's in your local restaurants or museums or hotels or retailers. We know that local businesses are where entrepreneurship is taking place. There's a public health literature that shows that communities that have embraced local food through locally owned food businesses have lower rates of obesity and lower rates of type 2 diabetes. And there's a political science literature that tells us that local business communities have higher rates of political participation, higher rates of voting, higher rates of volunteering. We also know that locally owned businesses are good for the environment. One reason is, of course, because they're generating more wealth in the community, that wealth can help to pay for environmental cleanup and restoration. We also know that if you have an economy that is more self-reliant, where goods are not imported from halfway around the world, that's going to bring down your carbon footprint. There's also an issue of shame. There's a wonderful study that's been done by the Environmental Protection Agency, which shows that when you compare smokestack industries, those smokestack companies that are locally owned have about 1/10 the emissions of those that are absentee owned. And really the only way we can kind of understand those data is to realize that when people who run a company bump into the victims of their pollution at the store, or at church, or at school, they get told off a little bit, and that tends to constrain their behavior. Whereas with an absentee owner, you have no such opportunity to give them a piece of your mind. There's also this point, which is everything you do in Carbondale that makes you more food self-reliant or makes you more energy self-reliant, and you then share those ideas with communities worldwide, moves the entire planet toward greater self-reliance and lower burdens on the atmosphere. So in other words, if you're really concerned about the climate, getting communities around the world to experiment and get themselves to be more self-reliant and share all of those ideas is the key to getting from here to there. Rule number 2 is to maximize the diversity of business in your economy. This is a study that I participated in, was done by a think tank based in Paris called Utopies, and it's an analysis of the economy of the island of Mauritius. And Mauritius is off the coast of Africa. It's been a relatively successful developing country, and like many developing countries, they largely have been successful on the basis of a few exports. In their case, financial services, rum, tourism. What this report says is that if Mauritius wants to get to the next level, they have to think about how to become more self-reliant. And not self-reliance in the way of cutting off yourself from the global economy, but self-reliant by diversifying your local economy. And I want to give you an example of what this looks like from my favorite delicatessen, ZINGERMAN'S in Ann Arbor. ZINGERMAN'S was opened in 1980, was very successful in its first 10 years, and then they had a dilemma. Should they become a chain delicatessen like Schlotzsky's? They decided against it because, number one, they were afraid of losing quality control being spread across the country, and number two, the owners didn't want to be in airplanes all the time. They liked being a part of their community and hanging out with their friends. So they decided that rather than grow broad across the United States, ZINGERMAN'S would grow deep. And they looked systematically at things coming into the deli and things coming out of the deli, and they built new businesses around it. So, for example, they serve sandwiches on bread, so they created a bakehouse. They serve coffee. They created a coffee roasting company. They serve ice cream and cheese. They created a creamery. And then looking at things coming out of the deli, they had good food. They created a couple of sit-down restaurants like the Roadhouse. They had good cakes. They created a mail-order cake business. They had great customer service. So they started teaching other businesses in Michigan how to do customer service really well. So in all, ZINGERMAN'S is now about a dozen businesses, all part of a community. They all are independently owned, all locally owned. They co-license a brand, and collectively, they are responsible for 750 jobs in the Ann Arbor economy and sales of over $65 million per year. Now, I want to point out a couple of things about this. First of all, notice how they started with local markets, local food markets, and then some of their businesses gradually and naturally, like the cake business and the entrepreneurship business, reached out to regional, national, and sometimes even global markets. I want you to also notice that this was economic development not done by the Economic Development Authority. And it's a reminder that sometimes the best work in economic development can and should be done by businesses or grassroots people themselves. Because unfortunately, the Economic Development Department is often chasing companies and doing the wrong thing. This idea of economic development through diversification is also, I think, one of the principal lessons of COVID. The old style of economic development was to get a global comparative advantage in something and then build that sector out and become dependent on everything else. Well, with COVID, we've learned that communities that are more self-reliant on things like food and energy and their own economy actually are faring a lot better. So really, every economic development authority in the United States is now pursuing resilience. But resilience, at the end of the day, is about greater degrees of self-reliance. Rule number 3 is spreading triple bottom line businesses. Now, some of you may be familiar with the B Corp label. The B Corp label is a standard for high social performance of businesses, and the B stands for beneficial. This has been around since 2006. There are some 3,000 companies in the world that have achieved the B Corp label. But what's interesting about this label is that the conventional view among economic developers is that what's good for the environment or what's good for the workers is going to be bad for the bottom line. But in fact, what we know is that when you look at the criteria for companies to become B Corps, those criteria actually generate benefits in the local economy. So, for example, if you pay your workers more, they spend more money, which pumps up your local economic multiplier. If you as a company are buying more local inputs, well, that also is stimulating your economy. If you're taking care to reduce your use of energy or water, well, one thing is you're doing your part to protect natural resources, which is good for tourism. But another thing is that you're reducing the demand for energy and water, which brings down the prices for other companies. So we could do this all day, but the point is that what's good for high social standards is also good for economic development. The last point is that the focus of economic development should be to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And what I mean by an entrepreneurial ecosystem is that you're mindful of 6 P words: planning, people, partners, purse, purchasing, and policymaking. Planning means identifying leaks in your economy, all the places where people are unnecessarily buying outside goods and services. People means nurturing entrepreneurs who will lead these leak plugging businesses. Partners means creating networks of local business that are more successful as a team than they would be operating on their own. Purse means tapping people's savings, whether short-term savings in banks or long-term savings in pension funds, and putting that money to work in the local economy. Purchasing means spearheading buy local or think local first campaigns. And then policy making is what the government does. And I'm a bit of a policy minimalist, and I would say that the first and foremost task of public policy is not to hurt local businesses. And so, for example, when you look at subsidy programs for attraction or retention, nearly all of that money goes to non-local businesses, which tends to disadvantage the local businesses that are key for economic development. So that's why attract and retain economic development is so unwise for getting to a prosperous future. Unfortunately, the response of most people when they hear this kind of agenda is, okay, we want a local purchasing program. Let's go out to a foundation and get them to underwrite it. Or let's go to the local government and get them to underwrite it. And while that can work for a year or two, it is not a good long-term way of doing local economic development. I believe that there's wisdom of local economic development being much more like the bee. So the bee, in a typical community, flies around from plant to plant, exchanging pollens, and that pollination helps to enhance the diversification and the fertility of all of the plants, all of the ecosystem. And significantly, to do this work, the bee does not require a paycheck from local government. Well, I would argue that there are certain kinds of enterprises, certain kinds of economic development programs that are a lot like the bee. They work with a lot of different kinds of local businesses. They're very efficient at what they do. They spread around good ideas, but most significantly, they operate as businesses on their own. They self-finance and they don't require that paycheck from local government to succeed. And it turns out that there are examples of pollinator businesses across the first 5 of my 6 Ps. Now, in my book, The Local Economy Solution, I have about 25 examples. We don't have time for me to share all of them, but I want to give you just a flavor of what's out there in each of these first 5 P categories. So, for example, planning. A good example of a planning pollinator is the Main Street Genome Project, started by this guy, Eric Koster. And it's a business near me in Washington, D.C. And the Main Street Genome Project basically goes to businesses, gathers information from them, and figures out how to make them more efficient. So, for example, one of the first things they did is they went to local restaurants in Washington, D.C. And they looked at their suppliers. And they realized, oh, some of these local businesses are paying 50 cents a pound for cauliflower, and some of them are buying cauliflower from the same suppliers for $2 a pound. So Main Street Genome goes to those suppliers and say, I think you need to redo your contract so that it's fairer. And typically for all of the restaurants that they're working with, they reduce the input prices by about 15%. And their very clever model is to share the gains over the course of a year, partially between themselves, Main Street Genome, and partially between the business. Who in your community is working with your businesses to improve their efficiency in this way? Another example is my friend Gilbert Rochecouste in Melbourne, Australia. If any of you have been to Melbourne, you probably have noticed that the alleyways of the city, which used to be kind of the focal points of crime, prostitution, drugs, and so forth, now have come alive. They are walkways. They are fonts of life where cafes and public art is happening. And that's an example of placemaking, activating a place and bringing alive the culture and the economy. Gilbert has worked in 1,000 communities worldwide. And he is, by the way, the person I am co-teaching the new local course with, if those of you are interested in this topic. But I would ask the question, who in your community is trying to bring your places alive. And there's lots of cool examples of communities that you might think don't have a lot of assets. So like you go to Blue Earth, Minnesota, and they have erected this Jolly Green Giant, which is drawing people from off the highway. Go figure. In Michigan, the state did something even better. They created a website that invited communities to present ideas for placemaking. And the state basically agreed for every dollar that someone in the community donated in support of a local placemaking project, the state would double it up to $50,000. And so at the time I took this screenshot, which was 2 years ago, they had raised about $7 million worth of stuff in 193 communities. What about entrepreneurship? How can you do entrepreneurship in a creative, self-financing way? Well, remember I mentioned ZINGERMAN'S and Zing Train. This is the woman, Maggie Bayless, who helped found Zing Train. And just so you understand, Zing Train actually trains about 1,000 local businesses per year how to run their businesses better. This doesn't cost money. This program makes money. And this program is actually delivered to investors a rate of return of about 15% per year. So how can you redesign your economic entrepreneurship courses so they are revenue generating? Here's another example. This one involves kids in Paraguay. There used to be a high school in Paraguay that was run by a convent. It lost money. A foundation, Fundación Paraguaya, bought the high school, repurposed it into a local food entrepreneurship high school. So every kid who goes through this high school has to learn 16 different enterprises. Things like running a dairy, running a hotel, running a restaurant, doing food processing. And these are not phony baloney businesses. These are real businesses, and the businesses generate money that actually underwrites the entire school. How cool is that? Why not do something like that with kids in your community? Another example is co-working spaces. There are impact hubs, several hundred of them all over the world, which draw not just businesses in the abstract, but mission-related social purpose businesses. And these impact hubs, most of them actually are run like businesses. They're not hugely profitable businesses. They just cover their costs with fees like running a sports club, or people come maybe a couple of days a month, but it's something. And then there are incubators. So an incubator is a place where businesses come in, they're given maybe cheap space, technical assistance, sometimes finance, and after some time of being incubated, off they go into flight, and they're successful businesses. And the value of incubators is that the success rate is significantly higher. Now, most incubators in the United States, I would say well over 99%, actually cost money every year to the local government and sometimes philanthropists. But here's an example of an incubator that's self-financing. Fledge is run by this guy, Michael Looney Lives, in Seattle. And Fledge basically takes businesses in, and when it spins them out, it takes a 5% equity stake in the businesses. Now, businesses can buy that back over the next few years if they want by paying a royalty payment on every sale they make. But this is a really nice way of doing incubation that helps bring money back to Fledge to support the next round of incubation. Honestly, this kind of framework is how every single kind of economic development should be done. What about partnerships? So remember, partnership means groups of local business that are working together as a team more successfully than they would on their own. So Tucson Originals is a group of local food businesses in Tucson, Arizona. They've been around for about 15 years. They collectively buy foodstuffs, kitchen equipment, and dishes. And by buying things in bulk, they bring down their input prices and are thus more competitive. Another business in Phoenix, Arizona, called Pickfly, is a good example of a local distribution pollinator. So we're seeing more of these kinds of distribution services appear. And, you know, Amazon can get you a book in 24 hours. Pickfly tries to connect you to the local bookstore in a matter of hours. And, you know, this is a model that ultimately Amazon is going to try to get you this stuff in an hour. But I think you can get there faster and better if you organize local businesses for this kind of direct distribution. This is the kind of alternative to the shopping mall. And it's also, I think, a way to build a more efficient delivery system. And remember how many people are at home, you know, who can't get out and do shopping. I mean, even before COVID, we knew that a lot of people were too young or too old to go out and shop all the time, or single parents who can't get out, or people with disabilities. Well, with COVID, in a way, we all now have some disability in doing regular shopping. And so these delivery systems have become more valuable. Another example of a kind of partnership is public markets. So this is a picture from one of the most famous public markets in the United States, the Pike Place in Seattle. Millions of people go through every year. And public markets, you know, are basically local business marketplaces. They usually focus on food, but sometimes they have other things like crafts or art or certain services like, you know, clowns and magicians. And what's cool about, you know, these public marketplaces is that unlike shopping malls, you're encouraged to linger, even if you don't buy anything. And it's fun to be there. In Seattle, you can see them playing volleyball with the catch of the day. These things can be done not just at a big level, but many smallish communities are creating their own public marketplaces. And think of it as kind of an advanced second stage farmers market, something that's open a certain number of days reliably every week throughout the year, where you can get great local food and connections with other businesses that otherwise can't afford a storefront. What about local purchasing? How can you do local purchasing in a cost-effective way? Well, the guy on the right is named Colin Pape. He's a software engineer, and in the year 2000, Home Depot and Walmart were rolling into his town of Midland, Ontario, and threatened his parents' paint store business. So he decided to come to their rescue with his software skills by creating for Midland their first website for local businesses that otherwise had no connection to the internet, shopmidland.com. There are now about 1,000 businesses on this website. They pay him fees to help do the visuals or write copy. And Colin has spread his shop local website to about 24 Canadian cities, most of them pretty small, and 12 American cities, again pretty small. And these sites don't cost money, they make money. for the licensees that run them. So if you're interested in something like this for your town, you should get in touch with Colin. Another example of a purchasing pollinator is from Bernal Heights, a neighborhood in San Francisco. So the guy, this tall guy there, German guy named Arno Hesse, he used to be a banker. He actually helped to create what's known as Bernal Bucks. Now, Bernal Bucks is a debit card from a local credit union. And he approached the local credit union and said, I see you've got a debit card, and there's a certain percentage that you're getting off every transaction that comes back to the credit union. I have a great idea. Let's repurpose, rebrand the debit card as a local debit card for local businesses, and you give that money to me, and I will run this program in a way that really benefits the local businesses. This program now supports a single staff person in this small neighborhood in San Francisco to run a buy local program. How about thinking about doing some kind of partnership with a local bank or credit union in your community for a program like this? If you're more ambitious, there are phone apps that have been designed around supporting local businesses. One of my favorites is Local Frequency, which has been developed by a firm called Protegra in Manitoba, which is a province in Canada. And the main places where this operates are the cities of Winnipeg and Brandon. Every time you spend money using your Local Frequency app at a participating local business, you build up discounts that are usable at other local businesses. And most importantly, the fees that the program gets from the businesses, which love this because it brings more people through their doors, the fees more than pay for the program. So this is the smart way to create a buy local program. Now, what about purse? Lots of examples of successful purse businesses. And some of you may notice that I'm on the program for this speaking series for a later discussion on investment. So this is just a taste of that. But we know that local banks and credit unions can be very financially successful and are really important for economic development. I've been doing a lot of work with Native American reservations over the last 2 years, and those reservations, like the Lakota Sioux, who've created their own credit unions, are the ones that are doing better in the pack. We have some really good examples of local investment funds. The New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, which has been around for 2 decades, has a portfolio of hundreds of millions of dollars of loans, many of which are used to help people in trailer parks buy the underlying land so that their housing is secure and their rates don't get jacked up. And the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund is unique, relatively unique, in that it allows anyone independent of their income to invest in the fund. Now this brings me then to crowdfunding. Crowdfunding basically means all of us grassroots people have the ability to make small investments in small businesses. This was legalized in the United States in 2016. And in the 4 years in which crowdfunding has been operating, about 500,000 Americans have put $340 million into 1,500 local enterprises. The average raise by these companies has been $270,000. The average investment, $750. The most successful entrepreneurs have been women and people of color. This is a home run for economic development. And you can use crowdfunding as a way of bringing resources into local investment funds. This is a handbook that I wrote, was published in January, called Community Investment Funds, a how-to guide for building local equity, wealth, and justice. The picture there is of a fund called the Boston Impact Project, which has gathered several $1 million in Boston, mostly from grassroots investors, and reinvests that in African-American run businesses. But there are like wonderful examples of these community funds all over the country. Some focus on food, some focus on affordable housing, some focus on cottage scale manufacturing. Figure out what it is that you need funding for in your community, and make creation of these kinds of community funds a priority. And one of the things that's critical in local investment is figuring out ways to help people tap their savings. The savings are either in IRAs or in workplace 401ks, and help them figure out how to crack those open so you don't have to necessarily invest in Wall Street, but you can invest in Main Street. And that's really the topic of my book, Put Your Money Where Your Life Is. Honestly, every community needs facilitators of this kind of local reinvestment. And those facilitators can and should charge for their services, and therein are wonderful pollinators that can facilitate a new generation of local investment. I think the last point that I want to make tonight is this. When I have conversations with economic developers after I present these ideas to them, they say, Michael, look, our job is to support all kinds of business, big and little, local and non-local, prison and free, whatever creates jobs, we support it. And my response is, I'm sorry, but that's totally irrational. You do not have infinite budgets. And every dollar you waste on an outside corporate attraction is a dollar that's unavailable for nurturing pollinators in the way that we've just gone through. And every hour of your time that you throw at an outside company is an hour unavailable for nurturing the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So at the end of the day, it is important to focus. I want to end with just a little bit of a pitch, and Amy mentioned this at the top of my talk, but I am about to start doing these workshops, actually 2 different sets of workshops. One set of workshops that I'm doing with Gilbert on the new local, and another set of workshops on local investment. And if you're interested in these workshops, please sign up at my website, michaelhschuman.com. You can get yourself on my mailing list, and here are also my calling card details, my address, schuman@igc.org, at Smallmart, and so forth. So I'm going to stop now, and we will move on to the next speaker until we get to some questions.
All right, thank you, Michael. And I want to remind everybody that you can go ahead and use the Q&A section to go ahead and put your questions in. That way I'll have time to organize a few of them and be ready for them at the end. So we're going to go next to Amy McMorrow Hunter. She is the CEO of shopcarbondale.com, a local pollinator. Amy taught herself how to build websites starting in the year 2000, and over the years has since developed everything from baby announcement websites to university departmental websites and online strategies. Amy moved to Southern Illinois in 2005 and has deep connections in the local community through her previous work with heartlandarts.net, a local partnership for local artist promotion, and many years of working as part of the SIU Carbondale research and sustainability community. Amy?
Thank you, Byram. Can you hear me and see my screen?
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you, Michael, for your presentation. You've been an inspiration to me for a while. I actually did get in touch with Colin there at Shop City, and so this is what I'll be talking about. ShopCarbondale.com. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me to be a part of this program. I'm excited to talk about ShopCarbondale.com LLC, a business I started a couple of years ago, and it's now ready to go. It's ready to help get things rolling for local businesses here in Carbondale and all of Southern Illinois. ShopCarbondale.com is a local business directory. Visitors to the site will normally come in through search results, but once they get to the site, there are a number of ways they can dive in and get more information about local businesses, products and services, events, and also restaurants and menus. It's easy to set up or claim your business. All businesses, even those just starting out or still figuring out their marketing budget, are welcome. There's a free option where businesses can list their business profile, get found on Google, collect community reviews, and sell gift certificates. We want to make sure all the local businesses from the smallest to the largest are represented. There are packages available for businesses interested in taking advantage of more advanced online marketing tools. So this might look a lot like other sites you've seen out there that list local products and services and let people leave ratings. But what makes ShopCarbondale.com different is that we're a pollinator. What does it mean to be a pollinator? Well, according to Michael Shuman in his book, The Local Economy Solution, it's a self-financing business with an economic development mission of supporting other local businesses. So let's take a closer look at what ShopCarbondale.com is doing. The thing that's familiar about ShopCarbondale.com is that it's going to show up in search results when you're searching for a product or service using Google search or other search sites. My experience with sites like this is that there may be good listings for some categories, but usually right at the top are the big box stores and chains, while I'm interested in finding locally owned and operated stores. So ShopCarbondale.com is different in a couple of important ways that help us get down to the business of finding and supporting local producers, artists, and mom and pop stores. So first, let's just run through this basic description here. So ShopCarbondale.com is a proven technology platform combined with a local advocate to, number one, showcase the diversity and depth of local business community, and number two, help local businesses sell more. So we have these two business services that provide the income for the economic development, which is number three, to help the local economy grow from within and prepare for the challenges of the future. So that's what makes ShopCarbondale.com a pollinator. The proven technology was built by ShopCity.com and it's licensed by my company, ShopCarbondale.com LLC. It works like Yelp and those other sites, but we're helping to get locally owned and operated businesses at the top of the search results, above the chains and the big box stores. By local, we mean businesses that are locally owned and operated and are reinvesting the majority of their profits back to the local people and the economy. A local advocate is advantageous because you need someone who understands the strengths and weaknesses of the local community, who's able to go out and talk to people and can help the community grow from within. I'm not an economic development professional, so I help find the experts. There are those out there like Michael Shuman and James Quilligan from our webinar last week who have the expertise to share. By economic development, we mean growth from within. We can stop giving outsiders huge tax breaks that no one is going to get, no local businesses, to entice them to come in and save us. We're going to grow from within, and we're going to help everyone in the community find their niche to bring our communities forward. An important facet of ShopCarbondale.com's operations is our partnerships. We have important partnerships to meet our goals. First of all, 50% of all ShopCarbondale.com package fees are donated to the Climate Economy, which is a nonprofit for education on business models and lifestyles that are good for the climate, economy, and humanity. The Climate Economy also has a Clean Network platform, which is a platform for getting ideas and getting involved. It's to help people kind of get started. So there's courses for clean energy and economic diversification and groups for project management and exploring ideas. We've also been involved with the Diame Terracotta, who are responsible for the Sustainable Living Guide, which has long and deep ties with the local food development and community development here in Southern Illinois. But we're really just getting started at shopcarbondale.com, but our inspiration is Shop Midland, that started out just like we are now back, you know, like 10 or 20 years ago, like Michael was saying, and grew over time to support a load of businesses and community development activities. So that is our vision that we're shooting for. So what are some of the things that we're doing to pollinate? Well, so far, we're working on a few areas to help pollinate our local economy by spurring growth in already existing local businesses and building growth from within. So first of all, automation and web services. I'm just going to show some pictures so you can see an example of how this works. The technology platform includes a simple login page where business owners can easily update their information. Depending on what kind of account you get, there are all kinds of tools you can choose from right inside your account. Anyone who uses Facebook can figure this out, and it's going to provide good jobs for entry-level web builders. I'm thinking high school age. Here's how to make a post in your shopcarbondale.com account. So you can post news, a new product, a sale, whatever. You can post it here, and it also goes out on your social media and also to your website once it's set up to do that. Same thing with selling products and services. It's a super simple interface. This is my sample catalog. I update my products here, and when I update things here, they're automatically updated in my online store, on social media, on my Google or Amazon stores, on my shopcarbondale.com page, and on my business website as well. It's a little bit of code embedded. So once it's set up, you're just able to post and then you're done. So this is actually a real site where I'm attempting to get virtual Southern Illinois Art Fair going for 2020. I really am going to miss all the art fairs this fall. So I'm hoping to get a bunch of artists and gift providers up here on the virtual Southern Illinois Art and Gift Fair. This is a word cloud of all the business activities just in the Carbondale area. This is what our businesses want to be doing. These simple tools will allow our businesses and entrepreneurs to focus on serving their customers and spending less time on marketing and sales. So, another pollinator activity is to educate businesses and entrepreneurs about how to save money and increase efficiency, including energy efficiency. Continuing education is something I think most businesses need to stay competitive and grow, as is apparent by the fact that the Small Business Administration has a whole section dedicated to online courses for small businesses. We're going to be focusing on different areas than the SBA. As you can see, we've got an introductory course for solar energy that's aiming to spread the Coal to Soul program, which installs solar at no cost to nonprofits and trains workers to become solar installers. Another is a free introductory course by Michael Shuman. His course here is named Local Investing, the Secret Weapon for Climate Action. He's also going to be talking about that on November 17th, like he was mentioning. We're linking to free and other courses that already exist and creating our own in some cases. We want to help local businesses find out about things that can help their businesses save money and expand into new areas. So speaking about expanding into new areas, we want to help build community resilience in the face of climate change through economic diversification. I was really happy to hear Michael talking about self-reliance through diversification, because that is what we're shooting for here. This was a survey of climate economy event attendees in Carbondale in June 2019. These ideas here in the left column represent economic opportunity areas that can help develop economic growth while reducing the use of fossil fuels and reducing waste. All of these ideas have potential in Southern Illinois, and we're aiming to help educate our citizens and grow new businesses and ventures. We'll be diving into topic areas with huge growth potential, such as smart buildings and energy efficiency, climate finance and investment, just transitions and climate equity, ecotourism, of course, and of course, clean energy and jobs, the biggest economic opportunity of our time. I encourage everyone to take a look at shopcarbondale.com and contact me anytime. I love pointers about more ways to pollinate as well, if anybody's got any ideas. Thank you for your kind attention.
All right, thank you, Amy. Our next speaker, let's see here, get our screens updated here. There we go. Our next speaker is Beau Henson, the founder of Inspiration Point Solutions. He spent several years as a regional planner and economic development specialist at Greater Egypt Regional Planning and Development Commission and was a fellow at the Delta Leadership Institute. Beau.
Thanks, Byron. Hi, my name is Beau Henson. I'm the program director for Solarize Southern Illinois, which is a special program that has been operating in Southern Illinois this summer. I want to thank Amy for all the work she's done to put on this seminar series. And I also want to say I'm excited to be on a call with Michael Shuman. His book, Local Economy Solutions, was one of many points which led to my disillusionment with conventional economic development and led me down a path that brought us here tonight. So I want to discuss Solarize Southern Illinois, just a little bit of background. Solarize SI is a solar group buy program based on a model developed by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. This model has been very popular in the Midwest over the last 10 years, and it's a nonprofit and educational in nature. Basically what it does is it pools potential solar customers into educational seminars, which prepares them to become educated customers and purchase solar, which can be a complex process. We recently finished our first year, the inaugural program here in 2020. The results included 330 kilowatts installed, over $1 million in total revenue, a first year offset of 486,000 pounds of CO2, and an average savings of $45,000 for each participant over the span of their systems. Now, Solarize SI aims to demonstrate how the local economy movement is the vehicle for social, economic, and environmental justice. It is through these lenses in which I present the Solarize SI program today. First, we'll cover environmental concerns. Solarize SI is the result of the merger of two volunteer community groups in Carbondale, one the Community Solar Working Group, and the other the Carbondale Spring Renewable Energy Initiative. We were both working on the subject of local renewable energy resilience. So this new working group was born of cooperation, and we maintain that concept as an operational goal throughout. As the benefits of the Illinois Future Energy Jobs Act struggled to reach Southern Illinois, the Solarize Southern Illinois Working Group decided to work under conditions in which we can control ourselves. Now, a group buy program appeared to be the right combination of being realistically achievable low-hanging fruit because we didn't have any money, while also promising likely material improvement in the Southern Illinois renewable energy ecosystem. I think we were certainly successful in moving that particular needle as demonstrated by the aforementioned metrics. Interestingly, however, an expected limitation presented itself. Only more affluent participants, defined by the ownership of private property, were effectively able to participate in Solarize SI. Personally, this program clearly illustrates market-only forces will inevitably fail to provide an energy transition to 100% renewables, especially when one considers the desired timeline to do so. So when it comes to environmental justice, I think the policy-making arena will continue to be very important. So this brings us to our second concern, economic justice. Now, solar group buy programs are an inherently exploitative model. And I say this critique without much moral or ethical judgment. Conventionally, inside of these programs, there are three distinct groups that make up a Solarize program. A set of volunteers that drive community vetting and marketing outreach, an administrative group that performs technical and legal functions, and a solar company who, of course, delivers the systems. Now, we put forth that lowering the soft cost of customer acquisition through volunteer labor certainly represents an unsustainable weak point for the model, and we set out to address that. So in the Midwest, Solarize programs have largely been administered by a Wisconsin nonprofit. This nonprofit did not possess the capabilities to reach Southern Illinois. Typically, these types of administrative groups are funded through a cent per watt fee paid by the selected solar company selected through an RFP, a request for proposals. Now, for Solarize SI, we identified this as an obvious capital leak that could be immediately plugged presented the opportunity to use this capital in a new and creative way. The admin fees would not only partially address the exploitative tendencies of the program, but taking collective control would allow us the freedom to insist on programmatic components that would potentially address larger economic justice goals and increase renewable energy infrastructure in Southern Illinois over a longer period of time. So basically we decided to do it ourselves. And luckily we were also provided material support from that very same Wisconsin nonprofit that usually does the administrative tasks of these programs. Now, 2 such components were added to the RFP. One, the responding solar companies would be required to add a workforce development component. The workforce portion of the agreement was specifically designed to address larger social justice goals. First, workforce participants would be selected from displaced workers, marginalized communities, and the poor. Those selected would be trained on jobs produced by the Solarize SI program itself. Secondly, in post-training, these trainees would be incorporated as a worker-owned cooperative and then would have access to the selected installer as subcontractors on future jobs. COVID disrupted this particular plan in 2020, but we are on track to do this in 2021. The second component was the creation of a renewable energy fund that would be used to spread solar or other energy approaches to communities who would otherwise be shut out of the group buy process. This part of the project is also on pace for 2021 utilization. This brings me to the third concern, which is social justice. Solarize SI believes establishing a healthy cooperative and local economies are a linchpin to social justice efforts. A large part of this is the democratization of the workplace through worker-owned cooperatives. While I do not wish to dig deep into worker co-ops here, I will simply note they tend to displace hierarchical exploitations, are more accessible to historically marginalized populations. For instance, it's estimated over 90% of recent worker-owner positions created in New York are Black, brown, woman, poor, or combination thereof. And to the interest of all of us, but perhaps even especially to more conservative-minded communities that are in Southern Illinois, co-ops increase the entrepreneurial, civic, and critical thinking skills of its worker owners. Now, cooperative economies are also a potential answer to the small business gray tsunami. Very shortly, SBA says over 12 million American businesses will close in the next 10 to 15 years due to retirement of current owners. I'm sure this is going to be exacerbated by the current COVID crisis. I think this is particularly true in the hinterlands. These are your rural, deindustrialized communities, generally affected by generational urbanization and brain drain. These are communities that we find in Southern Illinois. So Solarize SI and Carbondale Spring, we say the most logical candidates to maintain the legacy of treasured small businesses are actually the workers themselves. And I want to bring this discussion full circle. Solarize SI not only has a contractual agreement for the development of a worker-owned solar installation company, but also developed a design and media worker co-op that actually drove the marketing of Solarize SI. Solarize SI basically acted as this new worker co-op's first client. I think is a good example of a pollination or partnership. For social justice groups who never have any funding, the capturing of the program's admin fees proved crucial to implementing our wider goals. So finally, where do we plan on going from here? It's still in the works, but Solarize SI 2021 is expected to be a go. Not only do we hope to match or exceed the 2020 results vis-a-vis putting solar on the ground, but we also expect the training component and renewable energy fund to become fully operational. Now, simultaneously, I hope this innovative approach to Solarize programs will be geographically expanded for 2022, where we can potentially recruit other social justice organizations in the Midwest or Upper South to recreate what we did here under the banner of an Illinois-based worker-directed nonprofit. This would also spread some of these ideas to our closest neighbors, regions next to ours, which is an exciting proposition. Ultimately, the goal there is just to plant the seed of cooperative enterprises and doing so without any initial funding whatsoever. So thank you for letting me speak.
All right, thank you, Beau. Appreciate that. So now what I'll do is ask Amy and Michael to come back on as well. And please, everyone, and if you have some questions based on what you've heard or other things that you'd like to know, put them into the chat window and we'll work our way through them. So the first question I had, Michael, what are your thoughts on de-incentivizing non-local or chain ownership, such as municipal taxation or box store bans?
Well, this is a kind of a direct riff off of what I said about public policy, that public policy at a minimum should not be destroying local businesses. And when you put incentives in the law, so-called incentives, it's such a misguided, inappropriate word, but when you put incentives in that reward non-local businesses and don't give similar rewards to local businesses, you're basically penalizing, you're hurting local businesses, you're hurting the businesses that are most important for your well-being. So this is why, again, that all of these incentive programs are such losers when it comes to economic development. Now, I still think, you know, there may be a case for a community to provide tax breaks or money to local businesses. And there, you know, if you feel like you've got the extra money to do that, most communities don't, especially this year. But if you feel like you have the money to do that, here's what I suggest you do, that you create a RFP process that invites all businesses to the table and offer, you know, what are the jobs that they can produce for X dollars. And I guarantee you that if you have a process like that, open to local and non-local businesses, local businesses will win most of the time, because the typical subsidy that non-local businesses are demanding these days is several $100,000 per job. The equivalent subsidy that a local business would be delighted with to create a new job could be $1,000 or $2,000.
Well, thank you. Beau, one question on the solar that you're working on. Are you focusing on larger installs or even for individuals with their homes?
These are specifically smaller systems. They average about 14 kilowatts a piece, and we actually put a cap on it, I think at 35 kilowatts. Generally residential was our driver, but we had a lot of farm participation. This year, I think we had 0 commercial projects go out outside farms, which is not a huge surprise considering the situation with COVID.
Okay. Back to Michael, do you think it's more advantageous, specifically speaking around the ZINGERMAN'S topic that you had there, to build around smaller business rather than strengthening a large employer like they do in the Cleveland's Evergreen project?
Well, now you're asking me to choose among children, and I won't do that. I think that both are really good strategies, and they do somewhat different things. So, you know, with ZINGERMAN'S, what that model shows is the kind of thinking that you can impart on all kinds of businesses in your community. Now, clearly, bigger businesses, more successful businesses, you know, not with 5 employees, but with, you know, 50 employees, have more and more potential for expanding the way ZINGERMAN'S did, both through the input substitution and the value adding diversification of products. But really big enterprises, and those are the anchor institutions, I think they have a very important role to play too. Last year I did some work with the Rural Hospital Association of Wisconsin. And those rural hospitals are really the anchors of many of their communities. And getting them to buy local, to support local entrepreneurs, to do some local investment is a really important way of priming your pump and, intensifying your economic multiplier. So, I mean, this is a field where, yeah, you have to begin one P at a time. I guess that didn't come out right, but, but with each kind of, P activity, whether purchasing or purse or with anchors or something smaller, you sort of set a foundation for the next bit of work. And honestly, I think the place to start, if you're unsure where to start, purchasing makes sense as one place because everyone purchases something almost every single day. So it's a way of getting public buy-in. But I think purse is also very important too, because where there is money, where there's local investment, local businesses will follow.
All right. This one was directed towards Amy, but if anyone else has comments as well. With COVID-19, it's forced a lot of businesses to think different about how they're serving. Businesses that never used to deliver anything now are even delivering to their cars that are pulled up out front. With Shop Carbondale Local, were you able to find ways to help businesses develop? They didn't have a strategy to order online to deliver curbside, and is there an opportunity for that as well? Is that a model that might go forward from here?
I think it has to be a model that's going to go forward from here. I think everything has changed, and I don't think a lot of things are going to go back to whatever normal was before. And I think that as far as shopcarbondale.com goes, we tried to help at the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak with just getting people aware of what was going on and what some resources were and what people were doing. And I do know that our Power Shop, our shopping tool, does enable people to to set up curbside pickup and things like that. So these are definitely tools that are already worked into these things. They're ready to go. So hopefully we'll be able to help people over time get used to this new normal, however long it goes on.
Well, that's quite an advantage to not have to go out and spend a lot of money if it's already available to be used today. Michael, what might be good ways to develop these pollinators given the extra challenge right now of COVID-19? And also, how do we bring people together and get them excited?
Well, I think, doing more education like this, more initiatives like have been presented here, that's certainly, I'm excited by the things that were presented here, and I'm guessing other people would be too if they knew about them. I do think, though, that there's a very, one of the things that we can do with COVID that can really mobilize people now is through mass pre-purchasing. And pre-purchasing is important because unlike a loan to a business or the purchasing of stock in a business, which are securities and come under heavy regulation of the SEC, pre-purchasing, at least with businesses that are not startups, does not fall in that category. And what I mean by pre-purchasing is buying a bunch of stuff for the year in advance. So say you love a restaurant, you buy a year's worth of meals in advance. And the advantage of that is that it's money in the pocket of a business now that's really going through hard times, and it helps them hold on to employees and to deal with cash flow. So when COVID first hit, my partner and I decided to write $1,000 check to our favorite restaurant, Busboys and Poets, which is a combination restaurant, bar, event center, bookstore. We estimated that that's what we spend at Busboys and Poets over the course of a year. So We just wrote the check to the entrepreneur, Andy Shalal, and said, we really want to make sure you survive this terrible epidemic. So he was so pleased, he gave us a 20% bump up. So we got $1,200 worth of gift cards, 20% rate of return, which is pretty damn good. Now, here's the thing. That one act, it's nice, but it can't save one business. And I can't do this with multiple businesses. But what a community could do is create a very simple website that allowed every business to invite people to pre-purchase goods and services for the coming year, and in doing so, help them out to get through the pandemic. And I think this is really easy to do. And there's actually the people that I showed you who run Local Frequency. They have another platform called Local Futures, which facilitates this kind of pre-purchasing. So if you folks are interested in that, you should reach out to Protegra and get something like this going.
Okay. All right. Beau, on here, I mean, you answered a question. Someone had asked how many kilowatts in total, but I think you could say that. Could you respond to that to the group as a whole so everybody gets to hear that?
Yeah, it was 330 kilowatts. It was 25 total systems. And I see another question asked by Dennis specifically about a business in Makanda.
Yeah.
I'm a monthly customer of Rainmakers, my family is, so next time we'll down there, we'll just ask them about it. And I actually think thinking about the village of Makanda is really interesting because they have developed an organic culture over time. And I think they are a great candidate for placemaking and some of the other approaches that Michael's talking about.
And Beau, while you're talking, if someone is interested in this, do they get evaluated and then you tell them whether or not they're a good candidate for this, or is it, what's the process?
Are you talking about the Solarize
Yes.
program?
Yes.
Yeah, so basically anyone who's interested in being a participant signs up and they sit through a 1-hour educational seminar. At the end of that, they are simply connected with a project developer from the solar company in which the actual commercial purchasing process starts.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Michael, there's also some criteria in your books that communities should measure. What are one or two things we could start out with that would help us get these pollinators started, that might help us figure out where to focus our attention?
Well, I think one good starting place, which isn't too expensive or complicated to do, is a leakage analysis. And that's usually where I begin economic assessments of communities that I've worked with. And with a leakage analysis, you basically use a computer model like IMPLAN, and you identify leaks in the economy. And then you can play with the model and show, well, if we had 10% more local purchasing, say in food or in housing, what would be the extent to which the economy would be boosted? And I think having some of that data is really helpful in seeing what are the sectors that are most important to build out. And this is a point that I think is worth emphasizing, that the way that traditional economic development works is they look for so-called location quotients. They look for places where there's more of something happening in your community. So say they're, in Carbondale, of course, you have more education, right? So let's do even more education because that is your global competitive advantage. Leakage analysis takes the logic in a totally different direction. It says, okay, you're doing really well at higher education. Let's think about all the areas where you're not doing so well, like maybe affordable housing or the local food system, and let's really focus on that. So leakage analysis identifies like what are the biggest outflows of money, so you know what kind of businesses you should prioritize plugging the leaks of. So that, that's one kind of source of information. I mean, I think there's other kinds of indicators too that are worth looking at, like what is the failure rate of small businesses in your community? If you can bring that level down, you're doing well. What is the rate of business startups in your community? That's an interesting number to pay attention to. How much money do you estimate is going into local banks or credit unions compared to commercial banks or credit unions? And how much money is going into local investment? How many crowdfunding issues have come out of local companies each year? I think those kinds of data, which we don't traditionally collect, can be really useful in seeing progress. And I think, with Beau, I mean, he should be measuring, as he has been already, what are the number of localized kilowatt hours that he's providing, and what is the amount of carbon that he's saving? And with Amy, what are the number of local transactions that she's facilitating with the Shop Local app? So, different people in the economy probably can provide different and useful markers, different important indicators.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to have one last question here. There's a couple more that have actually popped up privately here, but we won't be able to get to all of them. But I want to tie two of them together, and that is talking about how do we overcome the myth that local products and services are more expensive and not worth it. And then also strategies for driving consumers into higher levels of local purchasing. And I want to add just a little myself personally to this, in that this is something that definitely, I used to live in Metropolis, and we would run to Paducah all the time to purchase stuff, but we never accounted for the fact of how much time we spent driving and of our personal time. And it got to be, it was definitely a problem that I was investing so much more of my time in the crowds and everything else that I could buy locally and save myself tons of time and stress and everything else. And also one other thing, talking about how local, the Corostado's Cooperative Kitchen during COVID really stepped up providing meals. And there's other examples too. There was a microbrew in Murfreesboro that started making hand sanitizer instead of brewing beer, Big Buddy Brewery. And it was an example of how they showed they could make the product here locally for a competitive price. And so I think that is there. But overall, like, how do we overcome this myth? It's much harder to overcome than just a few simple statements like that. And anyone's open to this question if they have anything. They have the answer.
Well, I'll speak to part of it, and I'd love to hear what my colleagues have to say about this too. So first of all, people need to be reminded that 70% of what households spend their money on is services, financial services, kind of personal care services, health services, and there is tons of evidence that the local providers of these services are much more cost effective, much more competitive than long distance suppliers. So our movement into a service economy has been great news for local competitors. And on the other 30% that's goods, 3/4 of what those goods are so-called non-durable goods, things like paper, food, building materials we use a lot of year after year. And the principal characteristic of non-durable goods is that they weigh a lot and they have a very low dollar unit value per unit weight. So food, for example, is mostly water, and it doesn't make sense to ship water from across the world into your community, unless of course it's Scotch whiskey, then we can justify doing that. So the point is that local food systems are really taking advantage of this cost effectiveness of the local production of food, given its weight to value ratio. So that's one point. Second point to make is that there is no such thing, despite what you learned in Economics 101, there is no such thing as a consumer that makes any decision based on price. every consumer makes a decision based on value, which is price plus everything else. If consumers only made a decision based on price, Starbucks would not exist. But Starbucks is the most expensive cup of coffee in town. And it is succeeding because of some combination of the perceived quality and the third place and the service and the branding and all of that. And this is frankly how local businesses have to succeed too. So that even when some of your goods and services may be a little more expensive than your competitors, there are other pieces you are providing to the value that makes them the thing that people ought to buy.
Good. All right, Beau or Amy, anything to add?
That's Amy's wheelhouse.
I mean, I would just say that, I mean, that's one of my goals, is just to help people create more of these goods that, and to add to the value and to figure out their creativity and to contribute these things to the community and to grow the value in the whole community together. So that's what I'm hoping that these efforts will lead to eventually, that everybody gets involved with this kind of stuff.
All right. Well, I appreciate everyone joining us here tonight. We will be skipping next week, so our next webinar series will be on November 12th at 6 p.m. It will be the third of the 4 in this series, where we will focus on worker cooperatives, what they are and how they work, and how you can switch to this business form. We'll be hearing from Sandra McCardle of the Cooperative Catalyst of New Mexico, Rob Brown from the Cooperative Development Institute, and Jennifer Rollison and Leah Missel from our very own Cristados and the Southern Illinois Food Cooperative. Also, we have set up a discussion group to develop projects for our community business development on thecleannetwork.com as a follow-up to these webinars. You can also find information on links on previous webinars and how to donate to this ongoing initiative. And as a reminder, our 4th episode of this series will be on November 17th, and we will focus on that one on local investing, where we'll be joined again by Michael Shuman, also by Kristen Barker from Revolving Loan Funds, and by Chuck Paprocki from the Carbondale Spring Revolving Loan Fund. So again, I thank you all for being here tonight. There's more information that I could have ever expected to try to write down in notes. So the good news is last week's episode, webinar series is now online, and this one will be, it'll take us a few days, but we'll be getting this one posted online so you can watch it, rewind it, write your notes, rewind it, watch it again, do that as many times as you like. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again on November 12th.
Cheerio.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.